Hello everybody, Louis here and let's talk C#. So today this is a very special video because we are going to talk about if statements. And essentially what if statements are, they are the very first control structure that we're going to be talking about in this course. And they are so important. I would say it's impossible for you to write any kind of meaningful code without using if statements. So it is very important that you learn this, okay? So to talk about if statements, we have to understand what they do. And for that, we're going to be looking at this flowchart. Okay, so this is a very simple flowchart. Shows you how to, it tells you the steps that you have to take in order to turn the lights on. Okay, so say you're in your living room and you want to turn on the lights. So what do you have to do, right? So this is a flowchart for that. So flowcharts, the way they usually work is that they're going to have a place where they begin and another place where they end. And in between, you're going to have a sequence of steps. Okay, so they are sequential steps. They happen in a specific order. Okay, so the order at which they happen is dictated by these arrows here. Okay, so this flowchart, if I want to turn on the lights in my living room, what I have to do is I have to flip the switch. Okay, so once I flip the switch, I have to observe, right? So did it turn on? Okay, are my lights on now? So from that question, two possible answers, yes or no. If yes, my lights are on, I can just, sit and relax, and that's how my kind of the process of turning your lights on ends. Okay. However, there is a second scenario where my lights did not turn on. So I flip the switch and they're still off. So if that's the case, something is wrong. So what I have to do is I have to go and fix it. Maybe I have to install a new light bulb. Maybe I have to, I don't know, redo the wiring or change the switch. I don't know. There's something that I have to do in order to fix that, right? And then when I fix that, I probably solved my problem and I can now turn my lights on, and that's when it ends again. So essentially this is what if statements do. Okay, so you're going to execute some code at some point. You are going to get an if statement, and this if statement is going to essentially be asking a question. So did something happen, or is a value equal to something? And if the result is true, in other words, if it's a yes, that value is true, for instance, then I'm going to do something. If it's not, I'm going to do something else. Okay? And then I can carry on with my code. All right, so this is essentially how this works. So let's take a look at the code and see what the syntax is. So for that, let's work on a problem. Okay, this is good because there is a sequence of steps that I want to show you that you can use to address any kind of simple problem. Of course, bear in mind that in real life situations, so when you get your job as a programmer, you will not follow these steps to solve your problems, because in real life problems are way too complicated. Okay, so you're gonna have to have other resources and do all sorts of different things in order to address real life complicated problems. But this is just an introduction to computer programming and C#, so we are keeping things simple. So for the purposes of this course, you can just follow these steps and you'll be fine. Okay, so let's think of an exercise here. So the exercise is going to be write a console app that prompts the user for the city they live in. If the city is Toronto, the program should respond by saying, Toronto is a beautiful city. if the city is New York, the program should respond by saying New York is close to Toronto. Okay. For other cities, simply respond I have never been to that city. Okay, so this is the problem. So again, a very simple problem, right? So the first thing I have to do is I have to declare my variables, right? So that's where that list of steps, the magical list of steps start, okay? So step 1, declare variables. And essentially I'm going to declare each and every variable that I'm going to need to solve my problem, okay? So in this case, I guess I only have one variable, really, so which is the user input, because this is a very simple problem. But maybe I'll have a problem later on that I have to declare 10 variables. I don't know. In this case, I'll just have a string, and I'm gonna call that city. Okay, I don't have any other variables, so I can move on to step 2. And step 2 is going to be collect inputs, right? And this is where I am going to prompt the user and ask whatever questions that I have to ask them, right? And then I'm going to collect that input, convert to a specific data type if I have to. There's another video here on that. And then I can move on, right? So if I have to ask the user what city they're from, what I have to do is do my console write line, and then what's the specific question? What city do you live in? So what city do you live in? And that's my question. So the user is being asked a question. They can be expected to type something, right? And they will type something into the console. And we have already said that everything the user types into the console is a string, is collected by C# from the console as a string, which is the same data type as my city variable. So I don't have to worry about any conversion here. So city is equal to console.readline. Okay, good. So what happens here is that even though I am done with step 2 and I can actually move on to step 3, and step 3 will be the actual algorithm. So what do I have to do now that I have all my variables, okay? So what I have to do according to the problem is, if the city is Toronto, I'm supposed to say something. If the city is New York, I'm gonna have to say something else. And for other cities, I have to say that, right? So there are different situations in here, all right? So if I have different situations, I'll have to have different pieces of code that will only run if the input is equal to something, right? So we're gonna have to use if statements. So the syntax for an if statement in C# is like this. If, and you can see that it actually changes color. It's a kind of a pinkish color now. And I have to use brackets. Okay, so this is where my condition will go, and I can actually, let me throw in a comment here. I'm gonna say condition goes here. Okay, I'll have to use my curly braces. Okay, good programming languages, they use curly braces. And here is where the code goes. All right, so this is the basic syntax in C# for an if statement. So I'll have the if, I have to have my parentheses here. In the parentheses, I'll have my condition or conditions. And then if this condition is true, the code is going to jump into these curly braces, and here is where the code will go. Now this code will only run if the above condition is met. Okay, this is very important. All right, so this is the syntax, and you know, very simple if statements. That's how they work, you know. So let's replace now these empty spaces with the actual syntax, right? So what is my condition? So my first condition that I have here, if the city is Toronto, okay? So my condition is my variable city equals Toronto, okay? Now, you may have noticed that I'm using double equals here, okay? So this is a comparison operator, all right? And there are different comparison operators. So let's talk about that. So I'm gonna have a side note on comparison operators. Okay, so there are different comparison operators. Okay, so we have equal, and this will assert if one thing is equal to the other. I'm putting in very simple terms here because I want everybody to understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so double equals, okay, they will assert if one thing is equal to the other. So that's exactly what I have here. I have a double equal sign, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to assert if my variable city is equal to Toronto. So the value that I have stored inside this variable called city is this equal to the word Toronto. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm trying to do, right? But there are other comparison operators. So we have that exclamation mark equal, which actually stands for different than. So it will assert if one thing is different than the other. Okay, so if I were to change this and put an exclamation mark here, what I'm doing is I'm checking if the value inside my city variable is different than the word Toronto. Okay, so that's what it does. This is not what we're looking for this exercise. Okay. Another comparison operator is the greater than or equal to. So asserts if one value is greater than or equal to another. Okay, so this is useful when we are working with numbers. Okay, so for example, I can assess if 5 is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so hopefully you have already seen this in math, and this is exactly, it works exactly the same way in programming. So is the number 5 greater than 0? Is the number 5 greater than or equal to the number 0? Okay, so this is essentially what is being asked here. And if we did have an if statement in this problem that involved this kind of comparison, this thing that you have inside the parentheses here would go in here, okay? Because it's a condition, right? So this is where your conditions would go. All right. The next comparison operator will be just greater than. And it asserts if one value is greater than another. Okay, so for example, 5 greater than 0. Now these two, they look very similar, but they are very, very different. Okay, so this operator will check if one value is greater than or equal to another. Okay, this one will check only if it's greater than. Okay, so for example, 5 greater than or equal to 0 will give you a true. Okay, so this operation here, the result of this operation is true. Okay, and it will also be true for the number 1, will also be true for 2, also be true for 3, also be true for 4, and also be true for 5. Okay, because 5 is not greater than, but it is equal to 5. Okay, so 5 is equal to 5, and that's why it will give you true. Now, if you do 5 is greater than or equal to 6, that is going to give you a false. All right. Now, this statement will be true for 5 greater than 0. It's also true for 5 greater than 1. 5 greater than 2 is also true. 5 greater than 3 is also true. 5 greater than 4 is also true. However, look at this. 5 greater than 5 is false. Okay? Because 5 is not greater than 5. 5 is equal to 5. Okay? So that's why this will give you false. And that's how these two operators right here are different. Okay? So this is just a quick recap on your math class if you're not very good at math. So now you know. The other one we have is less than or equal to. Asserts if one value is less than or equal to another. So for example, 5 less than or equal to 6 is true. And then we have the less than. Asserts if one value is less than another. So for example, 5 is less than 6. So again, it's the same difference here. So this statement will give you a true as a result, because 5 is less than 6. And this will also give you true. However, if you were to change this one to 5, it will still give you true because of the equal here. So 5 is not less than, but it is equal to 5. Okay? So if I were to change this to 5 and ask again, is 5 less than 5? The result is false, because 5 is not less than 5. 5 is equal to 5. Okay? So this is very important. So back to the problem here. If the city is equal to Toronto, what I have to do is I have to say Toronto is a beautiful city. And I'm just going to go ahead and Control-C that. And I'm going to replace this comment with my logic. My logic will be a console write line. And what I'm going to say is Toronto is a beautiful city. Okay, so what happens if I run this code? What city do you live in? I'm going to go ahead and say Toronto and press enter. Toronto is a beautiful city. Look at that. I do get my message. I do get the message that I'm looking for, which is good. However, what happens if I type something else? What happens, say, if I type Toronto all lowercase like that? Okay, so it's not the exact same thing that I have on my condition right there. So what happens if I do that? I don't get anything. So I did type Toronto, but I didn't get anything. So I actually went to the end of the code. So because my input was different than this, I did not execute line 42. So I skipped it and went to the end of the code, which is nothing. So that's why I didn't see anything in the console. So how can I fix that? Because I mean, in a way, I kind of said Toronto, so I did give the answer that I'm looking for. So it seems to me that this code is case sensitive, right? So we can go back to the other video on string manipulation. So if you haven't watched that video, it is somewhere in this channel. So make sure you watch that, because I will not cover, everything on string manipulation here. This is not the purpose of this video, but I know that I can use a method from a string that is called toUpper. And I know this method will grab my original string and make it all uppercase for me, okay? So if I go ahead and say something like that, now my code is no longer case sensitive, okay? So if I run this again, what city do you live in? And I'm gonna go crazy with my casing here. Toronto. There you go. Toronto is a beautiful city, and the code no longer cares about casing. Good. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So I think this is the simplest form of an if statement. Okay, so you're doing something in your code, and then all of a sudden you have to check if something is true, and if it is true, you're gonna do something. Otherwise, you're just gonna carry on, continue doing your stuff. So when that's the case, all you need is one if statement. Okay, this problem is a little different, however. So if the user types in Toronto, I have to say that. I'm gonna skip this one for a second. Okay, so I'm gonna ignore this part, and I'm gonna go to the very last one. So for other cities, simply respond, I have never been to that city. Okay, so I'm gonna copy that. And if that's what I want to do, and let's recap here. So if the user types in Toronto, I have to display this message. For every other city, I want to display something else. So if I want to do something else, I have to throw in the else keyword. And again, the else keyword comes with these curly braces right here. And what I have to do is throw in my console write line. I have never been to that city. So this is another format you can find if statements in. So before, all we had was the if statement. However, if this is not true, then I can throw in an else statement and do something else. All right. And this code, the code that goes in here, will only run if the above condition is false. Okay, so I'm gonna throw in some comments here. This code will only run if the above condition is true and this code will only run if the above condition is false. Okay, so let's run this again and see what we have. What city do you live in? I'm gonna go crazy with the casing again. And there you go, Toronto is a beautiful city. Now I'm gonna run this one more time. Now I'm gonna type in, I don't know, Los Angeles. And the code responds, I have never been to that city, which is kind of what we're looking for. So we are getting close. So let's take a look at this output and compare it to the code that we have here. So what's happening is that I'm prompting the user for an input. The user is typing in Los Angeles, And at this point right here, when the code reaches line 41, it's checking if the user input, which is my city variable, is equal to Toronto. If it is Toronto, it's going to display that, and we have seen this is exactly what it does. However, in this case, I did not type in Toronto. I typed in Los Angeles, right? And that's why I'm falling into this else statement, which is in turn printing console.writeLine. I have never been to that city, and that's exactly what I have here. Okay? And that's why I see that message. So this is the second form of an if statement. There is one more. Let's go back to the problem, and now let's take a look at this sentence right here. So if the city is New York, the program should respond by saying New York is close to Toronto. So let me copy that. So if we were to run this program again and type in New York, we would actually fall in here, and that's not what we're looking for. Okay, so we kind of need something in between, something that it's not Toronto, but it's not everything else. Okay, so for that, we have the else if statement. Okay, the else if is kind of an else statement that you already know, but I have the ability to throw in another condition in here. Okay, and if this condition is met, this code will only run if the second condition is true. Okay, so what is my second condition then? Second condition will be city is equal to New York. And I can actually go back and throw in my toUpper method to be consistent and make sure that my code is not case sensitive. And it's giving me an error because, why am I getting that error? So I can actually hover my mouse over this red underline, and it'll say the left-hand side of the assignment must be a variable, property, or indexer. So this is essentially what it's saying, is that you're trying to assign this value to this variable roughly, and this is not what if statements are for. So if you are using if statements, you're supposed to use comparison operators and not assignment operators. So I have to do double equals here. So that's why I had that error. Okay. So make sure that when you're using if statements, you are doing comparison operators. Okay. So seems to me that I'm getting closer to a solution here. So if the user types in Toronto, I'm gonna see that. If the user does not type in Toronto but types in New York, I'm gonna run this code, and this code is going to be New York is close to Toronto. Now if the user does not type in Toronto, if the user does not type in New York, and types in whatever other city the user types in, they will see this code. So let's run this. So if I want to test my code, I have to test every possible scenario, right? So I have 3 possible scenarios here. Scenario 1, user types in Toronto. And case does not matter. Toronto is a beautiful city. That's the output I'm looking for. Let's run this again. What city do you live in? I'm gonna say New York. Again, case doesn't matter. So New York is close to Toronto. Perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So my code works so far. If I run this one last time, and maybe type in Los Angeles and press enter, I have never been to that city. Cool. So let's compare again my output with this if statement. So if the user types in Toronto, this is not the case. The user typed in Los Angeles, so this code should not run, and it does not run. If the user types in New York, I should run this code. The user did not type in New York, and this code is indeed not being run. Now the user actually typed in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is not Toronto, Los Angeles is not New York, so it's something else. So because it's something else, I am running the very last line of my code, the code inside my else statement, which is I have never been to that city, which is the output that I'm looking for. Okay, so my code works. Okay, so essentially this, in a nutshell, this is what if statements are. Okay, so they can come in three forms. To do a quick recap. So it can be either the if statement alone, it can be the if statement with an else statement, so something like this. Okay, so this is a second form. And third form would be beginning with an if statement, ending with an else statement, and having else if statements in between. Okay, so I think that there's actually a fourth format for this, which is no else statement. Okay, so you have if and you have else ifs. Okay, for multiple conditions kind of problems. All right, so there are four formats that if statements will come in. Okay, yeah, so perfect. This is it for this problem. It has been solved, and I think this is it for if statements. I hope you learned something new. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.